France and the EU are disparate and a clear and present danger to Africa and her leaders. Introduction, France at the crossroads. It's not just about Burkina Faso. It's not just about one man in fatigues, speaking softly but carrying the weight of a continent behind his defiant eyes. What's unfolding in West Africa is not a minor diplomatic dispute or a routine coup. It is, for France, an existential crisis, a slow-motion geopolitical implosion. For over a century, France has survived and even thrived off the spoils of African extraction: gold, uranium, bauxite, oil. The French economic model, quietly reliant on its former colonies, was built not on innovation or production, but on the quiet plundering of African wealth. While Paris strutted on the world stage as a civilized beacon of liberty, it clutched its colonial leash behind its back, tight, unrelenting, parasitic. But now, the leash is snapping. At the center of this tectonic rupture is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old military leader of Burkina Faso. Young, charismatic, ideologically charged, and unafraid, Traoré is doing what many in Africa have dreamed of, but few dared to attempt: the full, unflinching expulsion of French influence. He has closed military bases, severed exploitative mining contracts, and, most significantly, turned east toward Russia, China, and a newly forming coalition of African states determined to break free from the neocolonial chains that still bind the continent's destiny to Paris. Make no mistake, France is panicking. Without African uranium, French lights go out. Without African gold, the euro faces collapse. Without African military outposts, France becomes an impotent middle power in the shadow of Germany and the United States. And with every African country that follows Traoré's lead, the facade of French grandeur erodes faster. This is not mere diplomatic turbulence. This is survival. The mask falls. What's happening in West Africa is pulling back the veil on a dirty secret in international politics: France is not the power it pretends to be. Beneath the illusions of G7 summits, nuclear reactors, and financial institutions lies a deep vulnerability. France is not rich in natural resources. It lacks energy independence. It is strategically insecure. Its status as a global player hinges almost entirely on its ability to control and extract from Africa. That control is now collapsing. And behind that collapse stands Traoré, a man who, in less than 2 years, has done more damage to France's imperial project than any African leader since Thomas Sankara. Which raises the question, when will France stop trying to eliminate Captain Ibrahim Traoré? In this report, we uncover the unspoken truth behind the headlines. France's fatal dependence on Africa's strategic resources. Traoré's revolutionary agenda, and why he terrifies the Élysée. The domino effect sweeping through Mali, Niger, Chad, and the broader Sahel. France's covert playbook: regime change, economic sabotage, and possibly assassination. And most importantly, the future of Africa, standing at the edge of unprecedented liberation or devastating backlash. The world's media largely ignores this story. Western analysts sanitize it. African elites, many bought and bribed, stay silent. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, Niamey, Bamako, and beyond, a fire is spreading. It is a fire of anger, awakening, and possibility. The time for vague diplomacy is over. This is the endgame of French imperialism in Africa. And it begins not in the halls of the United Nations or the cafes of Paris, but in the dust and defiance of Burkina Faso. France's hidden weakness: no resources, only gold. The illusion of French wealth. To the world, France looks rich. Its boulevards bustle with commerce. Its banks are global players. Its cultural influence, fashion, cuisine, diplomacy radiates far beyond Europe. On paper, France sits comfortably among the world's most developed nations, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, nuclear power plants humming with energy, and a military force with overseas operations on 3 continents. But beneath the marble facade of the Élysée Palace lies a dangerous illusion. France is not self-sufficient. It is not resource-rich. Its prosperity is not powered by domestic production but by external dependency, particularly on Africa. The mirage of the Banque de France. France often boasts about its gold reserves, 2,436 metric tons, the fourth largest in the world. Locked away in the underground vaults of the Banque de France, this stockpile represents centuries of accumulation, much of it extracted from Africa under colonial rule. Gold makes headlines. It lends prestige. But in the 21st century, gold is not power. It doesn't light cities. It doesn't fuel tanks. It doesn't build microchips, refine batteries, or launch satellites. France's modern economy runs on uranium, lithium, bauxite, and rare earth elements, resources that France does not produce in meaningful quantities. Remove African uranium and French cities go dark, says Dr. Michel Gailly, a political scientist and African affairs expert. Remove bauxite and Airbus stops making planes. France has masked its economic fragility through control, not capability. In other words, France has worn the cloak of prosperity while hollowing out its own strategic independence. Now, that cloak is being ripped away. A resource-poor power. Let's look at the numbers. France produces 0% of its uranium domestically. Its reactors rely on imports, mostly from Niger, until recently. Minimal lithium. Most supplies come from Australia, Chile, or African nations like Zimbabwe and the DRC. No significant rare earths. These critical materials are dominated by China, but Africa, particularly in east and central regions, holds vast untapped reserves. Dependent bauxite supply. Guinea is the world's second largest producer, and a vital French partner. The image becomes clear. France is like a luxury car running on fuel siphoned from someone else's tank. That someone has been Africa. Africa has been to France what oil was to Saudi Arabia, said an unnamed former French diplomat. The difference is that Saudi Arabia owns its oil. France does not own Africa. And now, Africa wants out. The neocolonial pipeline. For decades, France sustained this illusion through a brutal system known as Franco-African neocolonial arrangement, where African elites, often installed with French backing, granted favorable contracts and political loyalty in exchange for military protection and personal enrichment. It was a win-win for Paris and its clients. The losers. African people. The pattern repeated across former colonies. France provided military aid, anti-terror training, or infrastructure investment. In return, it gained access to critical minerals, control over exports, and influence over central banks through the CFA franc system, a colonial-era monetary structure still used by 14 African countries. The result was staggering asymmetry. France extracted billions annually from African economies through resource contracts. African countries remained locked in poverty, with GDPs lower than French suburbs. Dissenters like Thomas Sankara were silenced, often fatally. This system allowed France to maintain the illusion of independence, even as its industrial base relied more and more on African extraction. But illusions don't last forever. Traoré shatters the mirror. Enter Captain Ibrahim Traoré. In September 2022, amid growing public outrage over French influence, he seized power in Burkina Faso and declared war on neocolonialism. But this wasn't empty rhetoric. He acted decisively. French troops expelled. Mining contracts with French companies cancelled or reviewed. National sovereignty over resources reaffirmed. He wasn't alone. Traoré's rhetoric struck a nerve across the Sahel. Mali had already expelled French forces. Niger followed by kicking out French ambassadors and shutting off uranium exports. Chad and Guinea teeter on the brink of similar moves. For France, this isn't a geopolitical setback. It's a catastrophic unraveling. France never imagined a coordinated anti-colonial revolt in the 21st century, says Sarah Zubir, a French-Algerian analyst. They underestimated the youth, the internet, and the memory of Sankara. Traoré is not just a cool leader, he's a reckoning. And he's pulling back the curtain on a lie Paris hoped the world would never see. France is not resource independent. It is a resource addicted.